From PBS News Student Reporting Labs
and WETA,
this is On Our Minds, Election 2024,
with Nico
and Pujasai,
a podcast by teens for teens, covering what really matters to us. Hi, Pujasai.
Hey, Nico.
How are you doing? How's the first week of school?
My first week, well, I'm doing IB, so let's just say it's a lot. The content, oh my god, it's just like, guys, we're 16. Why are you just torturing me like this? I just came back from summer and everything, and let's just say I really want it to be summer right now. What about you?
I think I'm definitely already making plans for next summer. I'm taking 6 APs this year, and I think the first week just hit me like a train. My teachers are already giving me like hundreds of pages of reading, so much assignments.
For sure.
But today we're talking about this kind of like overarching concept in American electoral politics that is especially like taken the center stage in the past couple years, which is, does your vote matter? What about young people like conservatives who live in blue states or young queer voters in red states? And I mean, something that doesn't even come up in the conversation often is residents of U.S. territories and commonwealths like Puerto Rico.
But first, let's get a big picture view. In our conversation with PBS News correspondent Lisa Desjardins, we asked her about how she's seen politics change during the course of our lifetime. Here's what she said.
It's become way more partisan, way more ugly, and it has also become more of a money game. There was an attempt, in the early part of the century to limit how much people could donate to campaigns, and so that wealthy Americans would not have more influence than others. But the Supreme Court threw that out and said it was unconstitutional, that it was a violation essentially of people's rights to donate however much they wanted, and that was sort of a form of free speech. So what that did was it really removed the toughest limits on how much money could go into campaigns from any single person and sometimes from corporations. So now there is a massive industry based on advertising, campaigning, opposition research, making the other party look bad. The stakes have become less about values and direction and more about this just partisan divide, money, and kind of this industry of politics.
I thought that was so interesting what she was saying about how politics have become more about money and more divisive. Because on one hand, I feel like we're just seeing more of politics nowadays because of the internet and because of social media. But what do you think, Pooja?
I feel like sometimes politicians probably forget themselves that, they're put into this place of power to help others. I guess it's kind of disappointing to think about how divisive it has gotten. And sometimes, even if we do have these different opinions, have these different views, shouldn't the ultimate goal again really just be to kind of help everyone?
Yeah, seriously. I think these are questions we're going to be asking ourselves over and over in this election season. And people definitely divide themselves into more conservative and more liberal identities. And that's the topic of our first segment today. Special correspondent Maggie Lebeau from Lombard, Illinois, explored how divided her state feels between liberal urban and conservative rural voters. Here's Maggie.
When I drive out of Chicagoland down the I-57 highway, it's a completely different world. Instead of skyscrapers, I see cornfields. Instead of mosques, churches, and temples, I see Jesus Loves You billboards. The two parts of the state remain very different, especially politically. Because Democratic Chicagoland has such a large say in Illinois politics, I wanted to see how conservative Illinois residents feel, particularly with the ones who live in downstate, which is what we call the rest of the state outside of Chicago. I first talked with Parker Rabideau, a recent college graduate who grew up in the Kankakee area.
Very farming community. My grandma actually owns a farm, so I spent a lot of time on a farm. I call myself an independent because I don't like to use the label Republican, but I am a social conservative, fiscal moderate.
Parker, would you say that you feel represented in Illinois legislation?
Not at all. Absolutely not. I just don't feel represented, and it just didn't feel like voting mattered because no matter what I did at the ballot box, it was still going to be a safe Democratic state. I'm a highly motivated voter. I would say that most people don't share in my motivation downstate. I basically had to drag my mom to the polls.
Would you say that there is almost a resentment between people who don't live in the Chicago area versus people who do?
Oh, absolutely. I think it goes both ways. They see us as backward, intolerant racists, and we see them as these left-wing tax and spend hippie types. I think it's important that downstate Illinois does get recognition for what it does bring to the state. A lot of the Illinois economy is corn production, soybean production.
Michaela Barkowitz, who graduated from the University of Illinois Springfield this May, is a conservative and majored in legal studies and political science. Since you identify as being more conservative, do you think that your vote counts when voting for president in Illinois?
I think that, if I were honest, no. I think that it is the stereotypical Chicago votes for Illinois. I do vote and I do make sure my voice is heard, but I've heard other people with similar beliefs that they don't vote.
What would you say to the people that don't really want to get in politics because it's a blue state? Or they say that they don't want to vote for president because it's going to go to the Democrats?
I've heard that line from so many people. And I think that the people who align with my beliefs or who are really far-right people, I think they all have the same kind of common belief, is that I'm not represented. And why would I vote if it's going to go one way? And if you vote, you don't have any idea what could happen. You could completely flip that narrative.
Both Michaela and Parker have felt that it's hard to vote in Illinois and to convince others to care. But if you feel shut out of one level of politics, you can still get involved in another, like local or national. That's the beauty of a federal government system. Many places in Illinois and beyond have city commissions dedicated to Parks and Rec, human rights, agriculture, economic development, and much more. And there's often student representative roles. An impact is an impact no matter how small.
Wow, I love that piece from Maggie. And it made me think a little bit about my own state, California. We have this very rural part of Northern California, like on top of the Bay Area. And some people there actually want to create a new state called the state of Jefferson.
Wait, what?
To like basically leave California because they feel so like politically disenfranchised, because California is thought of as like this super liberal state. And that's true like in numbers. But when you look at like, I guess like the geography of California, it becomes a lot more red, right? Because rural voters are typically more red in California, but it's definitely super fascinating. I'm really curious about Texas, Pooja.
I'm pretty sure that big cities in our state, like Dallas and Houston and Austin and San Antonio, I think we lean towards more like liberal, more blue. But I know for sure that like more rural areas, like you said, Nico, tend to be more like conservative and red.
In our next piece, queer young voters in Florida have some of the same feelings about representation. Here's student reporter Orion Boone from Orlando, Florida.
My name is Orion. I'm 19, and since I was young, I've been looking forward to voting and trying to make a meaningful change for what I believed in. I'm trans, and I've known I was queer since middle school. I also live in Florida. Florida, though not the only state implementing these measures, has been notorious for anti-queer legislation in the past few years. House Bill 1557, colloquially known as the Don't Say Gay Bill, went viral a few years ago for prohibiting classroom discussion about sexual orientation or gender identity in certain grade levels. It's been followed up by bills like House Bill 1521, where students have to use the bathroom of their assigned sex at birth at public schools and public colleges, or they could face trespassing charges. My friend, Ann Porcelli, is a trans woman voting for the first time in this election. This legislation really impacts the way she sees voting.
It's just that so much has been passed that it's genuinely getting really hard to keep up with. I find it hard to vote for a politician that's going to really reflect my views, and it feels like voting for me more so just has to do with, okay, who do I dislike the least, and not like, oh, I actually like this person.
While this feeling is nothing new for anyone who votes, it's hard in my state to find a politician who both cares about queer issues and has a solid chance of winning. It just seems hopeless at some point. With Republican majorities in the House and Senate, and with Republican Governor Ron DeSantis in office, these anti-LGBTQ measures fly through the lawmaking process, while young queer people just have to watch. It's no wonder we feel discouraged. The left-leaning voters are centered in the cities, like Orlando, where I live. Even here, though, I feel unsafe at times. I've had slurs yelled proudly in my face, and I always get a little more nervous presenting masculine. Here's my friend Anne again.
I find myself fighting more vigorously and as hard as I can for trans rights and trans issues, and I fear for my life and my safety quite nearly every day, to at least some sort of scale.
Because of this fear, I've considered moving out of Florida more than once if I have the means. But sitting and waiting to move isn't a great option for Juno Lay, a trans mask friend of mine. He's more motivated than ever to go vote and make a change.
The whole point in voting is so that we can add up more like perspectives and more ideas to the voting pool. At times it's very discouraging because I'm like, why am I like, there's no point. But then I'm like, okay, well, if I vote and I get my friends to vote because I know my friends believe in this kind of thing, then like maybe we can make small changes. And that's why I believe in local elections like strongly, because you start on a smaller scale and you keep expanding, and that's how growth happens.
Get yourself registered to vote, research your candidates, and vote in your state and county elections. It's easy to just focus on the federal election, but the ones in your own backyard impact you so much, like my state representatives have impacted mine. These elections deserve your attention too.
I loved Orion's piece and Maggie's piece because I think they both really showed how it must be to be an outsider in your own state. And I think they really help emphasize the fact that voting really matters. Like Maggie said, an impact is an impact no matter how small it is.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that our next piece is, it's talking about representation, but in such a different format than the two pieces we just heard. So when we pitched this podcast back in November of 2023, we were thinking about what stories we wanted to add. And the first one that popped into my mind was the story about how young Puerto Ricans feel about this 2024 election. I myself have Puerto Rican heritage, right? Puerto Ricans, for example, don't have federal voting rights. I didn't want to tell the story myself because I'm not from the island. So what I did was I contacted schools across the island. We had some great students who produced this piece about how young Puerto Ricans are feeling about the election. And I'm super glad for you guys to hear it. Without further ado, this is Miranda, Jatib, and Adelaida Siaca from San Juan.
How Americanized do you feel?
No sé.
Del 1 al 10 como un 2.
Un 50% americano.
No mucho. Me siento súper puertorriqueño.
Puerto Rican students from the Ana G. Méndez University campus varied from feeling 50% American to hardly American to very American.
Yo me siento bien puertorriqueña.
I feel very Puerto Rican. I am a patriot, but I feel that we are also very Americanized.
Identidad.
Identity is one of the most conflicting topics in the island of Puerto Rico. Imagine this. You are at a Model UN conference, and the Puerto Rican anthem is played. People, as one would do for an anthem, put their right hand on their chest. After the Puerto Rican anthem ends, the anthem of the US is played. But for this anthem, some people put their hands on their chest while others don't. This is something Puerto Rican students like me experience in their daily life, revealing a complex reality where our Puerto Rican cultural identity intersects with American influence, a reality that translates to our voting rights. But what rights do Puerto Ricans have when it comes to voting in the US presidential elections? And what is Puerto Rico?
Historia.
Puerto Rico has been a colony since the Spaniards arrived in 1493. United States arrived as a consequence of the Spanish-American War in 1898.
Here is Luis Cámara, a political science professor from the University of Puerto Rico.
Puerto Rico had achieved a significant level of autonomy from Spain, but that was very short-lived. After the invasion, the United States had military government from 1898 to 1900, and then a series of more representative governments with the Foraker Act in 1900, with the Jones Act in 1917, and then with the Constitution that we have now in 1952.
What does this mean in terms of our voting rights? Well, Puerto Rico is an unincorporated territory, meaning that we are part of, but not a part of, the United States of America. Since we are unable to vote for the president and can only do so in the primaries, us Puerto Ricans have little say in federal U.S. politics. This lack of voting rights has perpetuated the colonial relationship between Puerto Rico and the U.S., where PR contributes to society like any U.S. citizen, but does not receive the benefits people in the United States do. Charlie Rodriguez, politician and former Puerto Rican senator, shared this with us.
Well, the problem of being a territory, of being a colony, is that you are subject to the obligations of being a citizen, but you don't have the equal rights. Puerto Ricans are subject to the draft whenever a draft is instituted. Right now, we don't have a draft, but when it's mandated, kind of having people who can die for this country.
This conflict has engendered a political arena where parties are based on different solutions to our territorial status. One is remaining a commonwealth, with some wanting more autonomy, becoming a state, or gaining independence. While all of these solutions seek to break from our colonial dependency and lack of rights. But in the past few decades, there has been no significant change, and the eternal debate continues. The Puerto Rican government has spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on ineffective referendums and a symbolic vote for the President of the United States, neither of which has had any effect on mainland U.S. elections.
La brega.
As we navigate the ins and outs of this reality, we have to deal with la brega, our daily struggles to get by. Here's Professor Camaragan.
The New Progressive Party has been promising statehood for years and years and years. When Governor Pedro Rosselló won in 1992, we did not become a state. And then the New Progressive Party won again in 2008 with Luis Fortuño, and we did not become a state. The Popular Democratic Party has been in power. The Commonwealth has stayed stagnant. Actually, according to several recent decisions by the United States Supreme Court, it has gained less ground, so it's gone backward.
As a result, youth voters have grown apathetic. To get a sense of what young people are thinking, my colleague Miranda and I went to, you guessed it, the House of Reggaeton, aka El Choliseo.
I think that they're bored and believe that everyone is corrupt. All the political parties until now have been almost the same, or have brought more or less the same corruption.
If we want to encourage Puerto Rican youth to vote in both the PR national elections and the US presidential primaries, we have to do more. Recently, artist Bad Bunny, for example, began a campaign where he offered special discounts to fans for his concert tickets if they presented a copy of their electoral card. By thinking outside of the box and utilizing other resources, we can find more effective ways of mobilizing young people.
Futuro.
University students had their own ideas.
Talk, motivate, the political parties should use social media.
They could start by creating awareness and providing more information.
Puerto Rican youth and the people are clamoring for an improvement of our essential rights, regardless of what our political status is, reshaping what it means to be Puerto Riqueño. And thus comes a hope for a better Puerto Rico, a future where we don't just bregar, or just deal with it, a future where we are not treated as second-class citizens, where we are granted the rights we deserve, and where politicians can keep the promises they make.
I learned so much in that piece. To be honest, you're right, Nico. I didn't even think about Puerto Rico before this segment. But I still don't know a lot either. So please educate me more about Puerto Rico. Why does Puerto Rico not have voting rights?
I think in the modern day, it is a really complicated conversation. A lot of particularly conservatives feel like, granting Puerto Rico statehood would give a really unfair advantage because the idea is that Puerto Ricans would vote Democrat. But I think it really is just a conversation about if Puerto Ricans are Americans and if they should be represented, electorally.
Thank you for that little history lesson. Seriously, I'm learning a lot, Nico.
No problem. I'm clearly very passionate about this topic. So going back to our original question, does your vote matter? Yes, it does. It definitely does. So please, if you're older than 18, register to vote.
Up next, we have an episode exploring who some of the youngest candidates and elected officials are, like Avery Bishop, who's running for state legislator in Texas, Wyatt Gable, who's running for state legislature in North Carolina, and the youngest African-American mayor, Jalen Smith from Earl, Arkansas.
One last thing, we want to tell you about another podcast we think you'll like. TBH is a podcast from KLW Public Media in the Bay Area like I am, by, about, and for teenagers. They're about to drop season 5, which is about how to make change in your community. They talk about what to do when you're too young to vote, and how to make the most of your power. How and why schools are crucial to having open dialogues about our identities is one topic they're covering, and they're also going to be pulling back the curtain on teen dating violence. Subscribe to TBH wherever you get your podcasts.
On Our Minds Election 2024 is produced by Student Reporting Labs.
Today's segments were produced by Maggie Lebeau from Lombard, Illinois,
Orion Boone from Orlando, Florida,
and Miranda, Jatib, and Adelaida Siaca-Ortiz from San Juan, Puerto Rico, with mentoring from Pilar, Álamo, and Sixto at sjspr.radio.
Research and fact-checking by Reesa, Venterea,
and Becky, Wandel. Music from Blue Dot Sessions.
This episode was produced by lead podcast producer Briget, with help from Associate Producer Wyatt Mayes.
Antonio Nevarez edited and mixed this episode.
Approval and oversight by Editorial Director Marie Cusick.
And Executive Producer Leah Clapman.